'tis the season for ranking all of the 3D printers. I've tried this here apparently. No, but really, I did this last year and I know a bunch of you found it super helpful, so I wanted to continue on with the tradition, but with a little modification. I'm a firm believer that there's a different perfect 3D printer out there for everyone, and these days figuring out what that printer may be is more challenging than ever. This roundup of 3D printers is, yes, going to serve as an update since all of their initial review videos, what the experience of using them has been like long term, but I also want to try to help you all narrow down which printer might work best for you. So for every machine, I'll give you my recommendations of what kind of maker I think would suit that 3D printer best. But first, there are a couple of things I'd recommend trying to narrow down for yourself to help with your search. Firstly is know specifically what you're interested in 3D printing. This will help you determine the minimum size requirements of the machine, what materials you want it to be capable of printing, and if you want it to be multicolor capable or not. Second is, of course, your budget. A pretty obvious and self-explanatory one, but I would say to make sure you leave some room within that budget to include things like possible additional accessories, whether that be additional build plates or nozzles, and also some room for some filament, especially if this is your first 3D printer. Lastly is experience, both your level of experience and also the experience that you want to have while using this machine. And what I mean by that is some people go into 3D printing wanting the 3D printing part itself to be the hobby, and other people really just want to use their 3D printer as a tool to create other things. So regardless if you're someone who's looking for their very first 3D printer or are someone with more experience looking for a new 3D printer, hopefully you will find this video helpful. But now let's get into this list. I'm going to be going by brand because there are a couple of different brands that I have multiple machines of, so I figured this was just the best way to go about this video. Starting off with Qidi. Here we have the Plus 4 and Q2 to talk about. These very much feel like a large and small version of each other. They have very similar, if not identical, specs other than their size. They aesthetically look very similar. They're both enclosed, have active chamber heating, and produce very beautiful prints. And thanks to them being enclosed with that heating, it means they're capable of printing just about any material, which suits my needs very well. Especially the Plus 4, which is the larger of the two machines. It can print a lot of helmets in one piece. Annoyingly, it's slightly shorter than it is wide, so some helmets end up being a little too tall for the build volume. It's a lot easier to have to split a helmet file to shorten its height than it is to have to shorten its width or length. I've had no consistent issues with the Plus 4, and it's printed me many a helmet and other droid parts and all of that fun stuff. Majority in ABS, since you all know that that typically tends to be what I'm printing with. The original Plus 4s did have an SSR issue, but that has since been completely resolved. The Q2, like I said, basically the smaller version of the Plus 4. Both of them have thicker belts on them, which means the possible VFAs on these machines are pretty minimal, at least in my experience. They both print very cleanly. The Q2 is technically in that 256 sort of size class of printers, but it's actually 270 by 270 on the bed and then 256 tall, so it's a little bigger, which is nice, and it also has active chamber heating, which is more rare for a machine of that size. So if you're someone who really needs that active chamber heating because of the type of filament you're using, then that's obviously a huge bonus and draw for that machine. Honestly, my biggest issue with both of these machines ends up being the Qidi box. Technically, it's now compatible with both the Q2 and Plus 4 in varying setup formations, and honestly, when it works, it prints beautifully. The multicolor prints look awesome, but when it doesn't, it's just unbelievably frustrating, and there seems to be no rhyme or reason as to why it doesn't work. When I was originally testing out the Q2, I discovered that one of the PTFE tube connectors seemed to have been creating more friction than necessary, which was causing a bunch of the issues with the Qidi box working appropriately. And once I removed that, everything was going smoothly. There's now a new version of the Qidi box specifically for the Q2 that comes with an additional riser for the top glass, as well as some other new parts, but right now it seems to be plagued by some weird firmware issues. Like, I'm literally having more problems now than I did a month or two ago when I originally was trying out this machine. So I guess the okay thing is that obviously firmware bugs can be worked out over time. Like, when you're seeing this video, this might be a non-issue, but it's just super annoying and frustrating to see firmware holding back a machine's capabilities. The Q2 really is an excellent single color printer, and it could be an excellent multicolor printer as well if there wasn't all of these weird bugs going on. Replacement parts for both of these machines are also pretty readily available. As with with seemingly every 3D printer company these days, Qidi does have its own slicing software. It's called Qidi Studio, which is basically a reskinned version of Orca, although I believe both of them are Orca Slicer compatible as well if you prefer just using Orca directly. There's apparently an app, although I haven't used it. Both of them use Fluid though, so if you have them connected to your Wi-Fi, you can access it through any browser using its IP address, including on your phone, and both of them have cameras, which means you can remotely control and check in on the printers. I think the Qidi Q2 and Plus 4 would be great for makers who need some higher specs on their machine due to their filament usage or types of projects they're looking at making, but without having to break the bank. Both of them are very powerful printers for the price. Your choice between them would mainly be whatever your minimum machine size requirement is for your types of projects. But for your own sanity, I would consider both of them being a single color machine only for now. But I do really hope that will change. Next up is Prusa, and in this category we have the Core 1 and Prusa XL. Kind of very much on polar opposite ends of the 3D printer spectrum, other than their print quality, which is both some of the best out there. I guess we will start with the XL, which in many ways was my ultimate possible 3D printer. I think multicolor 3D printing is an incredible advancement in the space, but I also absolutely hate the filament waste that goes into the majority of those prints, which is a big reason why I love and use the Prusa XL so much in my work. It has helped me produce some amazing multicolor prints. Multicolor prints I would have never been able to stomach doing without this machine in my workshop. You know, I multicolor 3D printed an entire life-size droid. It ends up being my choice machine for all of my multicolor 3D prints now, unless I'm testing out a new printer. That's pretty much the only time I will ever multicolor 3D print on something else. It's also still one of my largest 3D printers in my collection, which means if I need something printed in a single piece, I will also use it for that as well. You can choose to add an enclosure to it to make it compatible with more types of filament that need an enclosure to be able to be printed properly, but for me this is my multicolor 3D printer, which ends up just being PLA or PETG, so I'm quite happy to have it just working out in the open. At one point there were a few little firmware bugs that I might have talked about in my initial review video, but those have been completely resolved. But now onto the Core 1. This is a super fun printer with possibly the most customization potential that I've seen on a 3D printer as of late. You really have a ton of possible customization options to best suit your own preferences and be able to make it exactly the type of 3D printer that you want it to be. Originally, it had a nasty habit of producing some pretty visible VFAs on the side of prints, but since the belt tuning update, it is being completely resolved and now prints some of the best looking 3D prints out of any of my 3D printers. It is an enclosed machine, so it means it's capable of printing stronger filaments like ABS and ASA. It doesn't have active chamber heating, but it's also a smaller printer, so it doesn't end up really needing any active chamber heating to keep the enclosure warm enough for those filaments. It uses a type of brass nozzle, so if you're primarily printing in more abrasive filaments, you'll need to purchase a separate nozzle for that. You do have the option of adding Prusa's multi-material unit to make the Core 1 multicolor capable, and of course more recently Prusa showed off the index system, which looks absolutely incredible and I believe is coming out next year, which I'm sure is going to be an absolutely huge draw towards this printer now too. Both the Core 1 and XL can come in types of kits, so in that way it can be a little more DIY if you want it to. The XL in particular though, even with the pre-built version of this printer, there is still quite a lot of assembly required. The instructions are incredible and very clear. There's like a full-blown video and instructional tutorial that you can go through on Prusa's website to properly assemble this thing, but I also understand how that could be intimidating for people who haven't really tinkered around with a lot of 3D printers and just are generally intimidated by that amount of assembly. But on the other hand, that could be a big bonus for some people who really enjoy putting things together and also knowing exactly how their printers are built. Both of them are very user-friendly and there's a ton of information about both of them online and just general 3D printing knowledge that Prusa have helped create. Both of them also have some of the best parts availability out there, to the point that you can even 3D print your own replacement pieces if necessary. Both of them use Prusa Slicer natively, although I believe they are both Orca compatible. Prusa Slicer is one of the original slicing softwares that now all other slicing softwares are built from. You also have the Prusa app that you can check in on the progress of each machine. Neither of them have a camera built in, although there is a Prusa camera that can be added to both of them so that you can have eyes on the machine from the app as well. A unique feature to the Prusa app though is is the Easy Print function, which, unlike all other 3D printing apps, it genuinely feels like a mobile slicing software. With all other 3D printer apps that have the ability to send print jobs directly from your phone to a machine, you're basically relying on all of these pre-made, pre-sliced printing profiles that you really can't change any of the parameters for. But with Easy Print, you're choosing the model that you're wanting to print from printables, and then it will open the Easy Print function, and from there you can choose the infill type you want, the percentage, how many walls you want your 3D print to have, if you want it to have support material or not. Just complete customization, which as someone who is very particular about how their 3D prints are manufactured is much appreciated. In terms of the type of maker I think these machines would most appeal to, the XL is obviously like the ultimate multicolor 3D printer. So if you're someone who wants a nearly waste-free multicolor or multi-material 3D printing experience, then that is of course an excellent choice. But that might not be for long, because I'm sure the core one with the index system is going to be immensely popular with a ton of people. But the core one as it stands right now is still an amazing 3D printer. It would be great for someone who wants more freedom and customization ability for their machines, while still being able to print any materials they could possibly want. Next up, I have a few one-off printers, starting with the Elegoo Centauri Carbon. This is a crazy printer for the price. It has really good print quality, and it's also enclosed, so you're able to print with a wide variety of different filament types. Elegoo seem to have also made some quiet improvements to the Centauri Carbons over time. In my original review video, I talked about how dark it was inside of the chamber due to there only being a single LED light by the camera, but I've had multiple comments on that video since then saying that they have updated it to be an entire light bar now. So I'm really happy to see that those changes and improvements were made based on feedback. One thing I will say though is that the stock filament profiles for this machine don't print as nicely as some other stock filament profiles do. I would still say that for the majority of people it would be a more than acceptable result, but there definitely can be quality improvements made if you're willing to spend some time tweaking those filament profiles. But the same could also be said for the majority of other printers. Right now the Centauri needs to be classified as a single color printer only. When it was originally released, there was somewhat a promise or rumor of there being a multicolor system, and that may or may not be happening now. There's a lot of drama surrounding this that we just do not have time for in this video. When I was originally testing out the machine, I don't even think I was aware that there was the possibility of it ever being a multicolor capable printer. Personally, it's not really something I tend to care about either way. The majority of my machines I prefer to only be single color printers. But yeah, it was definitely a whole thing and still is kind of a whole thing. So single color unit only for now and most likely. One of the biggest problems that I have with this machine though is its nearly non-existent part availability. I had somewhat of a freak accident take out nearly the entire hot end. Part of a print job came loose from the build plate. It seemed to have come loose in a way that the nozzle then hit it and it kind of rammed it up against the glass door, which caused the nozzle to bend, but also some damage to happen to the fan cable because that all kind of came loose, and then somehow the cable ended up stuck to the warm hot end and it was a whole thing. So replacing the bent hot end wasn't an issue, but in an abundance of caution, I also wanted to replace the blower fan just because there was some visible damage to the cable and I couldn't find any. Some companies will put the replacement parts on sites like AliExpress and Amazon and not on their own site, which is a whole other grievance that I have with some companies, but I genuinely could not find this custom fan anywhere. I'm not sure if that's maybe the case now. Hopefully it isn't still. So I ended up contacting support asking like, what is this fan? Can I buy one somehow? Which they did agree to, which almost made me a little more annoyed because it's like, if you have all of these parts available for purchase, why would you not just put them on your website so that somebody could buy them as they need them and not have to deal with multiple days of back and forth of customer service? But yeah, that is my experience with the Centauri Carbon's parts availability. I do always hope that these types of things can improve, just like an unnecessarily complicated process right now. Elegoo once again has their own slicer. I believe it's just called Elegoo Slicer, and it is again an Orca reskin. It works, no complaints from me, not much to say there. I do think this is a really awesome little scale printer, great for people who don't want to spend a ton of money on a 3D printer but still want an enclosed machine. For comparison's sake though, technically at full price, the Qidi Q2 is only a little bit more expensive than the Centauri Carbon, except it's also larger, has active chamber heating, and doesn't have the same parts availability issue. So do with that information what you will. Next is the Creality K2 Plus. It is one of the largest enclosed printers available still. I found it to have really great print quality. It's also multicolor capable, although I would not necessarily recommend using it as a multicolor printer because due to the nozzle's design, it essentially wastes twice as much filament than pretty much every other 3D printer. I do still find the CFS useful for filament refills, especially given that this is a larger machine. You're possibly using more than 1 kilogram of filament on any individual print, so having the CFS that it can automatically switch to the next roll and not have to wait for you to manually do it is super convenient. One thing I did just have to mention though is I'm still specifically running it on older firmware. I honestly kind of do this for every machine, some brands more than others, but I do typically Google before updating things beforehand to find out if people are generally having a positive or negative experience with this new firmware. You know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And for whatever the current firmware is for the K2 Plus, there was a concerning amount of people saying that it bricked their printer. So of course I am not touching that firmware with a 10-foot pole, so I'm not entirely sure what firmware mine is currently running on. It does sometimes act a little buggy, but I will take a little buggy over a full brick. I also know that mine is like an original machine, so I'm not sure if that means it behaves more or less than the majority of people's. I ended up managing to buy one of the first 100 units when you could get it at like half off. So that is why I know mine is such an early production unit. So for better or worse, that is what I have, but mine does generally behave. In terms of part availability, there is again, annoyingly, not many parts on Creality's website, but Creality is also one of those infamous brands that likes to put their replacement parts on just about every other website other than their own. In terms of slicing software, Creality Print is also another Orca Slicer reskin, except this one actually works bad. The UI is just always buggy for me and is just such an unnecessary headache, so I just end up using Orca Slicer instead, which thankfully Orca Slicer is compatible with this machine, because if it wasn't, I would just like never use this printer. That is how bad Creality Print is for me, which is unfortunate because the printer itself, from my experience using it over probably multiple hundreds of hours at this point, is very positive. And if you're a maker that really needs that larger scale enclosed machine, then this is a very promising option, but I would argue there are possibly better, less headache-inducing options out there. Next up, we have the Sovol SV08 Max. This is the largest 3D printer I own and have ever used. It has a whopping 500mm cubed build volume, which is incredibly exciting as someone who primarily makes large-scale props and now has the option to print those various pieces in a single piece. Its biggest advantage is also its biggest disadvantage. This thing is absolutely massive. It is in fact what is on the floor behind me that Kyber the Lothcat has deemed as his perch spot. But yeah, it takes up a ton of space, which I'm sure you can probably imagine given that large build volume. Definitely a floor printer unless you are into building your own custom printer furniture. You do have the option to put an enclosure on it, which mine now has. When you enclose it, you do technically end up losing some of the build volume's height. I will put whatever that measurement is here because I can't remember right now. The enclosure itself doesn't have active chamber heating, but I feel like there might be an add-on available if you wanted there to be an extra heater. I haven't yet had the opportunity to test ABS out on it, but that's definitely something that I will be trying because I'm very interested and intrigued if that is a possibility, what I can then do for my own prop builds. One thing to note is that there really isn't much in the way of filament presets, and those presets don't work as well as some other presets for other machines. So some filament calibration is going to kind of be a requirement, and it's obviously going to be really helpful if you have the knowledge and experience on how to properly calibrate filament for that reason. And this just also being kind of like an extreme 3D printer on the scale of things, I would say that this machine is better suited for more experienced users. The possible time sink into these larger prints and also the filament cost and usage could make for some very expensive print fails. And I don't think it would make for a very positive beginner experience to find yourself out $60 in filament and like 3 days of work. I really view this machine as like a specialty printer, to the point that but I wouldn't recommend this being your only 3D printer. Unless your whole thing is printing giant life-size stuff all of the time, then who am I to stop you? It does have reasonable parts availability, or there are alternatives that are available. It is an open source machine and just generally doesn't have the same amount of custom parts that make up the 3D printer. Its native slicer is Orca Slicer, which I'm sure at this point in the video you can tell I'm a big fan of. It's a clipper-based machine, which means it can be controlled and checked in on thanks to its built-in camera on any browser. The SVO8 Max is a printer for makers who really need that extra large build volume. It's an amazing specialty printer, but it does involve a little bit more dedication than some of the other printers on this list. Dedication for both the necessary space requirements for this machine, but also the time to properly calibrate the filaments so that this machine can make the best possible quality prints for you. And last but not least, we have Bambu Lab. If your interest in 3D printing is the final product and not the 3D printer itself, these are the machines for you. I would still consider them the most beginner friendly on the market. They have near perfect filament profile presets and in general built an entire ecosystem around making 3D printing be as approachable for beginners and user-friendly as possible. They are my most used 3D printers of the year, and not just because I admittedly have quite a lot of them, but because they consistently are some of the most reliable 3D printers that I own that have rarely, if ever, given me any hassle or issue. I have hundreds, if not thousands of hours on some of these machines, and I think the biggest maintenance I've ever had to do was replace the hot end and fan on my X1 Carbon. The old downside to Bambu Lab printers was that they were all a 256mm cubed build volume, but this year we got the H2 printers, so that is no longer the case. The H2S technically has the largest build volume because the tool head takes up less space than the H2D, and it has basically become my go-to helmet printer. The build volume height is a little larger, so it has no issue fitting even taller helmets like clones in one piece on it. Even though the H2D has a slightly smaller build volume, it is still a very reasonable size that I have no issue fitting the majority of my prints on. I also do find myself using the two nozzles quite frequently. There are a decent amount of multicolor 3D prints that I'm interested in making that are majority just two colors, and because of that, the H2D is the only other machine that I tend to find myself multicolor printing on. It is equally as handy for multi-material prints. The H2 printers also have the unique option of being able to add digital cutting and laser functionalities too. I know it's kind of a polarizing feature. I do think the digital cutting is a lot more practical than the laser engraving, mainly because in terms of safety, you can easily add digital cutting to even the non-laser versions of the H2 printers, and that does mean it gives you the option of being able to digitally cut things out like stencils if you're someone who's also really into prop making. On multiple occasions, I have found myself using my H2 printer over something like my Cricut and dedicated laser engraver, because honestly it is really convenient, especially if you're someone like me that's not their main focus and consistent thing. It tends to be like random one-off projects that I need for something else, and it kind of ends up being a hassle to go to this whole other separate machine that maybe isn't as easily set up or accessible in my workshop. Bambu software is also very user-friendly. But going from the largest of the Bambu Lab machines to now the smallest, I did actually buy myself an A1 Mini this year, which I do think is a fun and awesome little printer. You could be limited by its build volume very fast, but in terms of a second printer, it's amazing. You could do what I did, which was just buy the machine, and if you're someone that also has other Bambu Lab printers, you can steal the AMS off of any of those and plug it into the A1 Mini if you need to for some project. We also have the P2S to talk about, which is just a fantastic all-around machine. It very much feels like an upgrade over Bambu Lab's original highest end machine, the X1 Carbon. So if you were maybe originally interested in an X1C, I would say look at the P2S instead, because there are some incredible user improvements and upgrade over that machine. One possible downside to all of these printers is they are very cloud and internet based, which I know people have very strong opinions about, but regardless of that, practicality could be an issue if your setup is somewhere where you maybe don't have great Wi-Fi access. You can still end up putting prints on and transferring them via a USB stick or SD card depending on the machine. Bambu Lab machines have some of the best parts availability. Sometimes it seems like you could buy an entire extra printer just in parts. That's how available all of the pieces are. Bambu Lab printer's native slice of software is Bambu Studio, which is fantastic. There's also the Bambu Handy app, which is one of the best, if not best, 3D printer software apps out there. Not only can you control, monitor, and send prints remotely from this app, it will also notify you if the machine detects any issues, if the filament runs out, or just if the printer is finished. Bambu Lab machines are the absolute perfect machine for beginners and anyone else that wants 3D printing to be a tool rather than the hobby itself. There's a pretty wide range of options depending on your budget and also spec requirements, but all of them print with the same incredible print quality, which is some of the best out there. As far as my personal ranking goes, which is not particularly scientific, so bear with me, but this is based on what I'm typically using 3D printing for in my work, which is primarily life-size and large-scale prop replicas, preferably out of ABS since it is so much easier to post-process. I do just also genuinely enjoy 3D printing as a hobby, so it's not like I don't also get up to more fun types of 3D prints, and I seem to always be trying to fix or improve something with 3D printing, so there's plenty of useful models printed as well. Over time, I realized just how much user experience matters to me. I don't always have the patience to be putting up with printers that are giving me grief, and ultimately I just want a reliable tool that I know can get a project done. In last place, I have the SV08 Max, and that is not because I think this is a bad printer. I just think it's very much a specialty printer, and it also feels a little weird to be putting it up against all of these other machines, given just how different it is to all of the other printers. If I was doing a video comparing 400+ millimeter printers, then this would make a whole lot more sense, but I have it in last place for now because I don't get the opportunity to use it as much as some of the other machines. I really only choose to use it when I actually need the large build volume, and that ends up being very dependent on what I'm working on at the time. It has helped me produce some of my absolute favorite 3D prints though. I mean, the rabbit mushrooms are always an audience favorite. They still look really great in my garden, and yes, the local rabbit population was also quite big fans of them. And there are plenty of other models I've used it for that it is quite literally the only machine that I own that would have been able to make that particular model, and for that it's absolutely incredible for. I just don't use it as much as I use some of these other machines. Next up is the Centauri Carbon. I do like the machine, but I like other printers more. Waiting for that fan replacement did end up taking quite a while, and if something were to happen to the machine again, it would also put it out of commission for possibly quite a while as well, which is, you know, never a great feeling when I put so much importance on reliability for the printers that I like using. Next is the Q2. Kind of similar story to the Centauri Carbon. I do really like the machine, but there are others that I like more, and the Qidi box kind of ruined a bit of the user experience for me. It is one of my newer machines though, so I haven't had quite as much time with it as some other printers, so my ranking or opinion on it might improve over time, especially if those firmware issues are ironed out. Next, I have the K2 Plus. I just don't find myself reaching or deciding to use it as much as other printers, probably because the user experience isn't always as pleasant or smooth as with other machines. Next, I have three printers tied for 4th place. And the tie is between the Core 1, the Plus 4, and the P2S. I know, they're all quite different printers, but to me, each one has a very strong point, and I couldn't choose which of those points I wanted to rank above or below each other, so three-way tie it is. The strong point for the Core 1 is its print quality. I get the privilege of seeing prints firsthand from quite a large variety of different printer companies, and there is just something about those Core 1 prints that is another level of flawless compared to pretty much every other printer I own. I don't know if it's the cooling situation or just the Prusa setup in general, but it prints absolutely flawlessly. It's also a very consistent printer, so I'm always quite happy to use it. Its one downside is that it is a bit of a smaller printer build volume wise, so I don't always get to use it for all of the projects that I would probably like to, and I also think all of the customization options with that machine are incredible. The Plus 4 is a fantastic printer for larger prints. Its one downside is it's not quite as tall as necessary for some styles of helmets, but you're still able to fit quite a lot of large prints on that machine, and it also has incredible print quality. And then we have the P2S, which is just a fantastic all-around printer. I find myself using it all of the time when I need something made because I know no matter what I give it, I'm probably going to end up with a successful print at the end, which is ultimately what really matters to me, especially if I'm trying to make some crazy prop build that I want out in like 3 days and I'm trying to do a crazy amount of 3D printing for it. I don't have time for print failures and issues. So the P2S has been an excellent little helper for that, on top of all of the just general great user experience benefits that Bambu Lab's ecosystem has. In third place, we have the H2D. For me, the H2D is an excellent combination of build volume, reliability, and also filament waste management, I guess we will call it, thanks to having two nozzles. It is one of the only printers that I will actively use for multicolor 3D prints or multi-material prints. It does have a larger build volume, so I can fit the majority of even my largest 3D prints that I'm looking at making on it, and overall it's just been extremely reliable, and I have had a lot of fun using the digital cutting and laser functionalities on it as well. In second place, we have the Prusa XL. It is one of my most used and favorite printers of all time, and the main reason it's in second place is because I don't use it for what I just stated was my typical use case for my 3D printers, but it gets pretty much every other type of 3D print that I'm making on it. It has helped me make some incredible multicolor 3D prints, 3D print projects that I would have absolutely never taken on if it wasn't for having this machine. It's fascinating to watch work, and it also produces some of the best looking 3D prints in my entire printer collection. And in first place this year, we have the H2S, mainly because it suits what I print the majority of the time best. It's one of the largest enclosed 3D printers I own, so it means I have no issue printing solid ABS pieces like helmets, droid parts. Between the entire set of Clone Trooper armor that I printed on this thing, multiple other helmets, Jar Jar, I have probably over 500 hours on this printer, and I don't think it has produced a single misprint, which is, you know, kind of the definition of reliable. Print failures aren't always the printer's fault, but it is good to know that it's not unnecessarily creating issues when you are hoping that this will be a successful print, and it of course has excellent print quality. It is also super helpful for me with my workflow to have all of these smart detection features that the H2S has. If there was a print issue, I could be notified on my phone, but even better, it will notify me when the print job is finished. So when I'm being an absolute lunatic and trying to get an entire set of Clone Trooper armor printed in under 2 weeks, then I'm not wasting time in between when prints are finishing and when I can put a new one on by not knowing the print job's actually done. Even though the H2S is of similar build volume to the H2D, it is technically larger, and I know for a fact that I have maxed out the build volume in basically every direction on multiple projects at this point. So I've clearly needed the extra build volume that the H2S has. And that is it for this year's printer rankings. I know it's entertaining to watch these videos and see all of these printers get pitted against each other, but remember, a lot of these are state-of-the-art, brand new 3D printers, but you can still produce absolutely incredible work on older machines, and machines that a large portion of the internet would ridicule as being absolute garbage. I mean, take IG-12 behind me, for example. He was printed on a variety of Ender 3s and a CR10S that by today's standards are barely functioning 3D printers. They were kind of barely functioning at the time too, but he still is one of my absolute favorite projects I have ever made, and none of you have been complaining about the quality of his print job. I would love to hear what your most used or favorite 3D printer of the year has been. I know there was a lot of 3D printers mentioned in this video, but it is still not even close to a comprehensive list of all of the machines available right now. If you've been using some machine that you think is incredible and would be a great fit for a lot of people, then please leave that in the comments along with any other printer stories of the year that you would like to leave. But that is everything. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.